Perched on the shoulder of a windswept Welsh hill was our new home, a stout, white cottage beside a lone gravel track that continued further into the rugged wilds of this green and gray landscape. Lichen-spotted stone walls snaked over the terrain and sheep grazed contentedly. I peered into the bedroom window and saw Ashley on a work call, nodding away, gesturing, making a point. It was refreshing to see her so lively after what the cancer treatment had done to her. Warm lamplight bathed that face I'd never get tired of seeing. We'd ditched London for Western Wales once she went into remission, bringing our son Archie with us. I'm a doctor and she's a marketing exec, so it was a simple case of me getting a transfer to the local surgery. Her job was remote. Archie was just about to begin his schooling, so it was now or never. We chose the former. I went over to the wall and touched one of the many stones, wobbled it around like a loose tooth. City boy that I am, I couldn't understand how something so fragile could be so enduring. This wall, our wall now, I suppose, had undoubtedly stood for centuries. "Daddy, look at this," Archie said. He was pushing a red tractor around on the front lawn, blonde hair whipping in the wind. "Wow," I said, squatting next to him. He kept building a stack of pebbles, wreathing them with a tuft of animal hair that had blown onto the grass, and smashing it down with the tractor. "Careful, Archie, you'll break it." But that's how you get him. Daddy. D. Goatman. Die. Goatman. Yeah, he's a man with a goat's head, and he's evil. With that, Archie smashed the rock pile down again. "That's enough now. It's starting to rain anyway." "Look," I said, pointing up at the leaden skies. Nobody likes to get rained on. Yet I actually like the unpredictable microclimate out here. I'd read somewhere that southeast England was drier than parts of the Sahara. "Do you want to come to the shop with me, or stay here with Mummy?" Archie deliberated, a twinkle in his eye. "Can I get some sweeties?" "Please." Chancer. Just like his dad. Maybe. "Come on then." We bounced down the 2 miles of gravel track until the tires of my car found tarmac. 10 minutes later, I pulled up to the convenience store, leaving Archie to snooze in the passenger seat. The shop was all dirty glass, rotten wood and chipped paint. A bell rang as I pushed open the door. A gray-haired woman stepped out of the back and took a seat by the till. I smiled, but she was wrapped up in her own world, eyes unfocused, and presumably crushed by boredom. I grabbed the essentials Ash had asked for, along with something for Archie, and went to pay. "Hello, just these, please." She punched some buttons on the till and I tapped my debit card. Everything about her was detached, casual, absent. Everything apart from the fidgeting hand at her throat. She was rubbing furiously at a silver pendant in the shape of a tri-spiral. It was an ancient Celtic symbol, the Triskelion. "Diolch," I said. "Storm tonight. Stay in," she said softly, still looking off into space. I hesitated, nodded, and left. Back in the car, I felt a cold finger trace the length of my spine. "Bah," Archie said, pawing at the window and the sheep beyond. "Stop that, Arch. You'll muck up the glass with your fingerprints." He crossed his arms and scowled. "Goatman will get you." We pulled onto the drive and Archie charged inside to find someone more fun than me. I savored a deep breath of that pure mountain air and went into the house. Archie was wriggling on the sofa next to Ashley, TV babbling in the background. "Leave your mum be, Arch. She's had a long day," I said, putting the shopping away. "Do as your dad says," Ashley said, giving me a tired smile. Tough as a nut. She was. Cancer survivor, fighter, mother, friend, the love of my life. It had killed me seeing her in distress throughout her treatment. The emotional agony, tears, fears, the what-ifs, hair loss, weight gain, allergic reactions, side effects. One night, as I held the bucket to catch her vomit in a pitch-black bedroom, feeling trains rumble by, I pitched the idea to her. "Let's get out, the three of us. Life is fleeting, after all." I couldn't see her, but I felt her palm cup my cheek, and I knew she wanted it too. "How was work?" I asked. "Yeah, fine. Good." Time was sliding by. I cooked, and we ate, relishing this shelter from the downpour that had begun outside. While I scrubbed the pots, Ashley put Archie to bed before saying she was going too. "I've got a headache. Could be a migraine." "Hope not," she said, rubbing an eye. "No problem, Ash. Sleep well." She kissed my cheek and glided out of the kitchen toward the bedroom. I sat on the couch, opened a beer and put on some trashy TV. Two men were sawing a hole through some ice in Alaska, presumably to catch fish. One of them addressed the camera, gesticulating and pointing behind him at his colleague. A fork of lightning lit the sky to my right and I snapped my head towards the window. Silhouetted there was the shape of a short, wiry man with the head of a goat, staring in at me. Boom! The thunder rolled in. Rain pelted the window, and I Saturday Frownson. Another fork struck. Further away this time. The light revealed a quite normal scene. There was nobody there. Boom! I stood and went to the window. Sheet lightning lit the barren landscape again, and I was still alone. Had I imagined it? Boom! I went to bed. Ash was asleep, but restless. She moaned and twitched and mumbled. "I can't see. I can't," she muttered. "Shh. It's all right," I whispered. She had flashbacks to low points in her treatment sometimes, so I assumed it was one of those. Where he goes. Nobody knows. They don't know. He with the horns. He's here. The calamity. He's here! Beneath the curtain was the charcoal darkness of a foul night. The closest streetlight perhaps 500 meters away, but it slowly grew darker. A purer black. Someone was standing there. "No, I don't want to." "Please," Ashley mumbled, forehead slick with sweat. I rose, reaching for the curtain. Where the shadow shifted, I ripped it across, and a shape darted around the side of my home. I burst out of the room, grabbed a kitchen knife, and swung open the front door. Gale buffeted and rain lashed. I stood there on the threshold of my new home in the middle of the night. I restrained my breathing to listen, eyes scouring the gloom for this phantom. The Welsh hills were the anvil for Thor's great hammer as the next lightning assault struck. Off to the north. I blinked raindrops away and caught a snapshot of the scene. I saw dry stone walls, my lawn, my car. I saw looming hills framing a wide valley, and I saw a distant figure, naked and pale, crouched and running beside the path that led deeper into the wild. Body of a man, head adorned with the skull of a goat, two curved horns hanging above bony shoulders. Darkness returned, and with it, the soft peal of thunder. The next day, I was troubled. I resolved to get security cameras fitted, and floodlights. Should I have rung the police? What would I tell them? Had the guy actually committed a crime? Deeper down, I wondered whether he actually existed at all. I went outside. It was blustery and bright. Archie was arranging pebbles on the lawn. "What you making?" "Archie, a shape Goatman doesn't like. I hate him." My eyes bulged. I'd seen the shape not 24 hours prior in the convenience store around the neck of a troubled woman. A Triskelion. I'm conscious of overreacting, but after everything Ashley has been through, I don't think this situation is tenable, even if it turns out to be some prankster. I'm seriously considering putting the house back on the market and getting out of here. Beware. Lately, I've been having trouble keeping a consistent sleep schedule. I'm sure plenty of other 20-somethings can relate. Every time I manage to fall asleep at a good time, I'll stay up a little bit later the next night. And so on and so forth, until once again I'm waking up at 5 p.m. and going down at 7 a.m. As I have no girlfriend or job or goals in life, it really hasn't been a problem I've been keen on fixing. Anyway, cut to another sleepless night, and I realize I have literally no clean clothes. I live in the middle of hot Arizona, so even someone who doesn't go outside often ends up with pit stains in his shirts. Plus the grease from wiping my meals on my jeans was getting a bit thick too. So, genius that I am, I decide to go a laundry run. My apartment complex has a laundry room, a short walk away from my building. So washing my clothes at the dead of night isn't the most insane idea. But of course that doesn't keep me from feeling creeped out on the walk there. You know that feeling. Being in the middle of the city, way past a reasonable person's curfew. When it's dark and quiet, and you feel like you're the only person there. You know you aren't, though. The city has a population of several million, and you're in the middle of an apartment complex of over 50 units. That sense of quiet feels fake, that loneliness misleading. It sort of feels like you're doing something wrong, or you're somewhere you aren't supposed to be, but you can't logically put a feeling on why. Anyway, That's how I felt as I took the short walk to the laundry room. The laundry facility itself is actually outside of the gated community. For some reason, so I had to go through said gate to get there. When you're doing this after midnight, you feel like a complete asshole, or at least I did. It's one of those cheap metal gates with this new lock that opens with an app on your phone. So in addition to the loud, rusty-sounding creak of the gate opening and the echoing slam of it shutting, there's also an obnoxious when it unlocks, compared to the eerie silence of the sleeping city. It seems like the loudest noise that could be. It feels like you might wake your neighbors, or alert something else in the quiet dark to your location. It's the city, so of course it wasn't that dark, with streetlights everywhere to try and create some semblance of safety. Even so, the fluorescent, white lights of the laundry room felt like a relief when I stepped in from the dark. Quiet, hot night air. Turning the washing machine and hearing those thumps and electric hums felt even better. I felt a weird comfort in there, like I was in a confined, safe space that was shut off from some great trouble on the other side of the door. It reminded me of when I was a kid, and I would sit in the bathroom, letting the shower run, knowing my parents fighting in the other room wouldn't bother me in there. If that seems like too much information, it's because it's such a specific kind of feeling, and if you can relate, you might understand how weird it was to suddenly be feeling it here. The point was, I Saturday down, on one of those little benches facing the wall of dryers. I Saturday down, looked at my phone for a minute. Then I leaned my head back and shut my eyes. The next thing I remember was the sound of someone trying to turn the locked doorknob to the laundry room. The room has sort of an L shape, and my back was to a wall that blocked my view of the door, so I couldn't see who it was. I could tell, however, that they were really trying to get in, shaking the knob violently as if the electronic lock would give out with enough pressure. I thought about letting them in, but then I heard them. "Hello," a man's voice said. "Are you in there? Can you open the door? Open the door, please." Maybe I'm just a bad person, but as soon as I heard him speak, I frowned. I decided, in that moment, not to be a good Samaritan, and instead stay Saturday there, where I knew he couldn't see me. I remember thinking to myself, if he was supposed to be in here, he'd have the app on his phone too. If he was allowed in here, he could unlock the door. The idea of a stranger trying to get into the laundry room with me this late at night, a stranger who didn't even live here, was enough to keep me away from that door. I was stuck there now, and so I leaned my head back against the wall and shut my eyes again. "Hey," I snapped back awake at the sound of another person. There was a guy peeking over from the bend of the corner, as if he wasn't sure if he was supposed to see me there or not. He was dressed in a black sweatshirt and skinny jeans, bald, with the greenest eyes I think I've ever seen. He was pale and gaunt, and had a look that made me think tweaker against my better judgment. I made small talk with him, trying to act like I wasn't just asleep. We talked about how hot it was out there. He asked which machines were empty, and I said all of them more or less. It was an awkward, quick little exchange, until he said, "Did you hear me at the door?" I felt icicles on the back of my neck. It was only now that I recognized the guy's voice as the same from before. I felt guilty, and more than that, afraid of what he might do if I said yes. I immediately felt all the more uncomfortable being alone here with this guy. No, I lied. I was asleep. Sorry. "Are you lying to me?" he said, with a weird sternness in his voice. It was like a parent talking to a child. "No," I responded. "No, I really was just asleep. I couldn't hear you. Sorry." "Huh," he responded. He stared at me for a moment, his mouth hanging slightly open. It felt like the longest couple of seconds of my life, until he walked away to tend to his wash cycle. I stared at my phone until he left, dreading every single moment as I attentively listened to the sounds of his footsteps until I heard the door shut again. When I was certain he was gone, I knew it was time to get back home. But then, I frowned again. If I was uncomfortable being alone in here with him, I thought it would be so much worse being alone out there, in the dark, with him. What if he followed me home? The thought kept me on that bench until I felt my eyes closing again. When they opened again, that dude was back in front of me, leaning down, staring right into my face. I jumped, to say the least, but didn't have the courage to shout at him or do anything but whisper, "What the fuck?" in a panic. "You fell asleep," he said, like some kind of detective. His inflection was so strange. It was like he was asking me a question and making a statement at the same time. I didn't know which it was, so I responded, yeah. I was as far back against the wall as I could be at this point, clearly trying to get away from the man standing between me and my escape, instead of seeing how uncomfortable I was. Though, he chose to sit right down next to me. I felt like I might just break into tears at that moment. Are you here all alone? That question was maybe the worst thing I could have heard at the moment. No, I lied. I'm waiting on my brother. I don't have a brother, much less one I was waiting on. But I wanted to put the image in the guy's head that there was another man coming here soon. I felt like it might keep me safer. Aha, he said in response. His voice was raspy, and the weird way of pronouncing what I imagined was meant to be felt like something trying to remember how to sound human. It's then that he put his hand on my thigh. You're a sweet thing, he said, and I felt my lower lip tremble. Sweet tender. I'm a man, and I'm not in the best shape. So I am in no way used to getting hit on, certainly not by crackhead dudes with no sense of personal space. It was possible, I assumed. But something about the way he was looking at me made it feel wrong. I struggled to describe it. Even in my own head, he wasn't looking at me in a way that felt lecherous. In fact, it didn't look like he had any kind of desire within him at all. Instead, it felt like there was some kind of inexplainable hunger behind those eyes. Whatever the case, I never want to know what he was thinking in that moment. I heard the door open again, and the sound was startling enough to break me out of my fear trance and make me stand up. Another man came in, this guy much heavier than both of us, and hairy too, with hair longer than most women I've met, and a big beard on his face. It must have given some credence to my lie from before, because the tweaker guy stood up when he saw him. He shot me one more of those inexplainable glances before heading out the door. If I wasn't going to walk out that door before, I sure as shit wasn't going to do it now. I felt way more comfortable with this new guy here anyway, especially since he seemed to mind his own business. Before I knew what I was doing, I found myself shutting my eyes again. Don't go with him. I woke up again to the sound of a new voice, and given what happened last time, I was in a panic. This time, however, it was just the heavier guy in the room with me, tending to his dryer. I must have slept through his entire wash cycle, and I was immediately surprised and worried that I wasn't woken up by the tweaker in all that time. You shouldn't go with him, the guy said again, his back facing me. I shouldn't go with who? I asked, confused, but somehow feeling like I knew just who he was talking about. Don't go with that guy, he said again, a bit of a hum in his voice as he started the dry cycle. You won't like him. He isn't good for you. Okay, thanks, I said, not sure what else there was to say. He simply nodded and walked back out into the night. I realized quickly that this was probably my best chance to get home. I all but ran my way out, not caring about my laundry, which was still sitting wet in the washing machine. As soon as I cleared the threshold of the door, the dude was gone, nowhere to be seen, and I was immediately in some kind of panic. I started power walking towards my apartment when I heard a familiar voice, and my heart all but stopped. Hey there, he rasped, sweet and tender. I broke into a run towards the gate, and without thinking tried the handle. It was locked, of course. And as I reached for my phone, I could hear the sounds of rushed footsteps against the pavement behind me. My hands were shaking as I tried to unlock my phone, get to the app, and hold it to the gate's Bluetooth sensor. Oh my God, the loading bar. It felt intentionally designed to break my heart, moving up to 60% and then stopping for a few seconds. A second that felt like it would be my last. I cursed at my phone, my voice cracking, pleading to just work, until I finally heard that obnoxious beep, which at that moment was the greatest sound I had ever heard in my life. I reached for the gate and pulled it open. It got maybe 2 inches open when I felt firm hands grab my shoulders, pulling me back. I watched my grip slip off of the gate handle and saw it slam shut, locking in place. My eyes flew open, and I was back at the laundry room. I broke into a weak laugh and even started crying a little bit. The laundry cycle was still going, and according to the timer on the machine, I couldn't have been asleep longer than 10 minutes. That was an hour ago. I'm sitting here, still in the laundry room, typing all of this out, because I don't know how else to keep myself awake. I called 911 immediately. but I'm still waiting for a patrol car or something to show up. I told them that I felt like my life was in danger, that someone was following me and was going to attack me if I left the laundry room. I really didn't know what else to tell them. I don't know what to think myself. Really. All I know is that a few minutes after I woke up, I heard the door to the laundry room shaking, and a familiar man's voice asking, "Hello, are you in there? Can you open the door? Open the door, please." I want to warn that there are descriptions of animals dying in this. I am a 23-year-old living in the Midwest with my wife. I started dating my wife a couple of years ago, and that's where my mother's spiral began. She had always been kind of unhinged. My father died when I was 18, it was quick. Brain cancer. The kind that once it's discovered, it's too late. Even as my father turned into a ghost of himself, I never saw my mother cry. She would sit by his side, knitting and talking about the inanest things. I swear most of the conversations she had with my dying father were about the masked singer. He died while I was there, but my mother was at the farmer's market. He held my hand as he left, and I waited until after his eyes closed to let the grief leak from my eyes. She showed up about 20 minutes after with a tote bag carrying assorted vegetables. "I think I am going to make a casserole tonight, what do you think?" She set her bag down on the hospital chair, pulled out her phone, and started dialing. "Yeah, I am going to be late tonight to bridge." Her voice sounded even, but I swore I caught a hint of glee. I heard her friend swearing on the other side, but I couldn't make out her words. "No. Yeah, Jim died. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, please let Kelsey know she needs to bring more food, and not any of her experiments either." Afterward, I got food poisoning for a month. She chuckled as she said it, and I am sure the same hollow laughter was echoed from her friend on the phone. "So, what do you think tuna casserole?" Those words stuck in my head, and sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat with the taste of tuna casserole suffocating me. I decided to put off college to stay home with my mom. Her joy was obvious, and she made no attempt to act like the grieving widow, just a mother overjoyed at more time with her child. Those months went by in kind of a blur. The only thing that sticks out is the one night I stumbled onto my mother's bridge group. My mother was hosting, and she made it clear that she wanted me out of the house. I had left to hang out with some friends and planned to stay over with one of them. This friend would later turn out to be my partner, but that's a longer, happier story that doesn't belong next to the gloom of my mother. Me and my friends first went out to eat and then planned to go out to a local bar that treated fake IDs like the norm. I had been drinking there since I was 15 years old. While at dinner, I realized that I had forgotten my wallet, and after my friend awkwardly paid for me, I had them bring me home to retrieve it. Sarah and Thomas waited inside as I headed towards the door. I turned my key as quietly as I could, and was in the process of going to my room when I smelled smoke. My first instinct was to yell, but something held me back. I slowly inched towards the living room. My eyes saw the source of the smoke. On the center of my coffee table Saturday, a little Bunsen burner illuminating the otherwise shadowy room with its blue hue. My mother and most of the other members of her bridge club were gathered hand in hand in a circle around the tiny flame. Kelsey, the woman known for her grave kitchen mistakes, held what looked like a little cutlet from an unknown animal. Her varicose finger clutched the fatty meat firmly as she held it over the burner. Now I know what you're thinking. And my mind made the same leap. This is some fucking cult thing, isn't it? I thought the same. But it was so hard to put the reality next to these middle-aged women, not dressed in dark cloaks, but in enough khaki and plaid to outfit the entire PTO. Almost in response to my mental jab, Kelsey's eyes met mine peering from around the corner. "Hey there, are you hungry?" Her tone was pleasant, but her eyes were venomous, and I left quickly, knocking over a fruit bowl as I fled. I made a half-hearted attempt to pick up some pomegranates from the ground, but decided an explanation later was better than more time in that house. I skipped the bar and slept over at my friend's house that night. In the morning, I expected to return to lamb's blood splattering the photos in the hallway. Instead, I was greeted by the smell of bacon and my mother's convincing smile. "Hey, honey." Her eyes were honey and she pulled out a chair for me. "I hope you're hungry." She heaved a large helping of bacon on my plate, nestled between some scrambled eggs and toast. Sure." I gave a half-hearted response and Saturday down. My stomach felt unsettled, but I decided eating was preferable to talking and started to dig in. "Did you have a good time with your friends last night?" she said, sitting too close to me for comfort. "I am sure that Clancy's missed your patronage last night." Her mouth was turned up at the corners as she pulled my fake ID from her wallet and placed it on the table next to me. "Oh yeah, we decided to stay in instead," I said in between mouthfuls, hoping my chewing masked my discomfort. "Well, if I had known, I would have invited Sarah and Thomas inside. You know how us girls love to see how the young people are doing." I didn't think about this until later, but I don't know how she knew who brought me home. I had been out with a lot of friends, any of which could have brought me back, and I made Thomas burn rubber as soon as I had gotten to the car. "Yeah, it looked like you guys were busy. I decided not to bother you." "Oh yeah, Kelsey got it in her head to try hibachi or Korean barbecue or some shit." She lifted my empty plate from the table and started washing it. "I swear I envy your father taking the quick way out. Kelsey's cooking is killing me slowly." She hadn't really mentioned my father since his death, and the nonchalant way she talked about it felt inappropriate. I know, however, that people grieve in all sorts of ways. We never talked about the event again, and like most things with my mother, it was just another thing that went unsaid. As time went on, I started staying away longer and spending more time with my now wife, Sarah. My mom made her displeasure known in her usual onslaught of passive aggression. "I wish you could have tried this casserole fresh," she'd say after a night away. "I watched Conan last night. It's not as funny without you there." She always had humor in her voice, but left just enough room between words and sentences to make me feel like shit. Eventually, my mother asked me to bring over my little lady. Sarah took no convincing. In fact, she basically convinced me. "I know things with your mom are weird, but it's better to deal with this shit, believe me." I know. And I knew that she did know. Sarah's parents had no contact with her when she began her transition a year ago. She had so much anger for them, but I still saw the sadness in her eyes when the anger faded. We went over on a Friday night for what my mother assured me would be a meal to remember. As we Saturday down, my mother's eyes lingered on Sarah. "Can I take your friend's coat?" she asked, refusing to acknowledge my relationship. She also made the intentional effort to mess up her pronouns every third sentence. "How did you meet him?" she asked, always busying herself when she let her bitchiness show, unable to face the angry look in my eyes. I corrected her every time, but Sarah would clutch my hand every time to assure me. When she could see I had enough, she quietly whispered in my ear, "She is making an effort. It's okay, I can handle myself." I nodded quietly, and my mother paused and looked deeply at Sarah. "Nothing," Sarah replied. "You know, my family actually used to go to the same church as you." Sarah's voice was beautiful and made my breath catch in my throat every time. "What the fuck did you just say to my son?" Her words were bombs hurled at us from across the oak dining table. "Mom," I said, attempting to cut her off, but she already had too much steam. "We don't tell secrets in this house, so either tell me or get the fuck out." Sarah was calm, having endured far worse from her parents, I'm sure. "It wasn't a secret. Get out." My mother cut her off and slammed her fists on the table, narrowly avoiding the mashed potatoes. I stood up ready to yell or fight, but Sarah took my arm and said loudly enough for my mother to hear this time, "It seems you guys have some stuff to talk about. I'll wait in the car." She went to grab her coat. "No," I said calmly. "Mom, Sarah is a part of my life now, and she can either be a part of yours too, or my whole life can be separate." The words hung in the air like Damocles' sword. My mother still had fury in her eyes, but seemed on the verge of tears. "I made you," my mom replied. "I sacrificed my life for you. My parents fucking beat me. And you act like this. Where do you get the fucking nerve, you selfish brat?" A favorite tactic of my mother, bringing up her trauma to erase mine. It normally worked too, I'm ashamed to say. This time I settled into a weird sense of resolve, either because of Sarah's presence or finally having enough. "Mom, I'm going to leave now with Sarah, and if you decide you want to talk tomorrow, let me know." I grabbed Sarah's hand and started walking towards the door. My mom was glued to her spot but yelled after me, "Sure, leave. Everybody fucking leaves me just like your fucking father." Hearing that made me turn for a second and made me feel actual pity. Maybe my mom was worse off than she let on. This time Sarah did leave, letting her hand fall from mine, but smiling on the way out. I heard the car door close before I chose to talk. "Mom, if you want to talk about Dad, I know his death was a shock, and it hit me really hard. You know how much I loved him." My vision became cloudy with tears as I inched closer towards my mother. Her expression turned stone-faced. "He left me months before his fucking brain exploded." Sharp and cold like ice, her words left impacts in my skin. He fucking cheated on me with that skank Suzanne. This man you loved got what was coming to him, and so did that fucking bitch. I couldn't believe what she was saying. Suzanne was my father's old secretary, who had died in a car accident not long after my father. Too blank to process that additional grief at the time, but Suzanne had always been nice to me. Even so, they didn't deserve to die, Mom. Apparently. Her eyes met mine. They did. I left right after that, feeling hollow and dark inside, longing for the fragile peace from before that conversation. No matter how much I hated my mother, I still did feel bad for her. Her texts the following day went from sweet to violent in a steady back and forth. Honey, I'm sorry about last night. Please come over to talk. Sent at 7 a.m. You know that fucking bitch had it coming. Sent at 7:12 a.m. I am sorry, honey. I will even talk to her if you want. Sent at 7:15 a.m. The last message I read before blocking her was sent at 10:00 a.m. that morning. You can't outrun a mother's love. Blocking her filled me with guilt, but I couldn't face it. I was honestly worried she would find the right thing to bring me back. Sarah comforted me through the whole thing, all too familiar with the territory. I never went back for things. I moved in with Sarah, switched to my own insurance, and got a delivery job that paid well. Sarah got a great job, and we were able to move to a better place a couple of hours away from my mom. I didn't block my mom on Facebook, and she quickly took to messaging me. I didn't respond or even look, but I would occasionally browse her page and saw how she had started posting transphobic memes almost immediately after our fallout. My mom, who never held a single political opinion before, at least I never saw her express it, now seemed to spend a large part of her day as a troll. The echo chamber in her comments was all too enthusiastic to support her ignorance. I noticed every comment had her entire bridge club hyping her up. So, fucking true you are, mother. Kelsey would always comment some variation of this that my mother would like. When I posted my engagement photos, my mother commented mere seconds after, "Gods will burn that sinner, don't let her come with you." My heart felt heavy, replacing joy with sadness as I deleted the comment and blocked her from everything I could think of. My wedding day was beautiful. Even the absence of my mother couldn't stop me and Sarah from having the times of our life. We were surrounded by the family. We chose the one that also chose us, regardless of anything. The only sour note on the day was the doves. Secretly, I had organized for doves to be released after the ceremony. I planned the whole thing as a surprise for her. As we met for a kiss, I heard an attendant open the box behind us. I looked to the sky but saw no doves. I glanced backward at the box. All of the white doves lay in the box, their feathers stained crimson, their wings and legs stretched in unnatural positions. The attendant flashed me a shrug and looked on the verge of being sick. I motioned for him to cover the box, and I never told Sarah about the surprise. When I inquired with the company, I got vague answers and a refund that left me mostly satisfied, if not disturbed. Married life was amazing. We had already lived together so long that the piece of paper only solidified what me and Sarah already had. Now to the present, and I apologize for the long preamble. I am pretty sure my mother cursed me. The first night that led me to this was when I woke up to the familiar taste of tuna casserole. I sprang up from a bad dream I didn't remember. Sarah slept like the dead as I crept out of bed to go to the bathroom. I pissed and splashed some water on my face. When I looked in the mirror, I noticed the way the shadows behind me seemed to stretch and move, even with the steadiness of the light source. Cool water dripped down my face as I saw one shadow seemingly creeping over to my wife. No, not creeping and not exactly moving. It was just a concentration of darkness that was barely perceptible against the blackness of the room. I couldn't move. I was frozen to the spot. My throat, trying to yell out, felt like hot lead had been poured into it. The shadow stretched out a limb, or whatever it was, towards me and Sarah's wedding photo on her bedside table. Dark fingers swirling around the frame, seeming to intensify. Its ink, fighting against the bathroom light and the full moon hanging in the window. A crashing sound at the window woke up Sarah and caused me to jump. I looked and then ran to the window, and as I did, the shadow evaporated. "What the fuck was that?" Sarah said, turning on the lamp by her side. I was standing in front of the window now, peering into the night. The brightness of the moon made my backyard look like a perfectly lit stage, ready for some great tragedy to unfold. My eyes scanned the ground and quickly found the source of the noise. Some bird flew into the window and broke its neck. My stomach lulled as I saw the strange bird with perfect clarity. The way it lay reminded me of the doves from my wedding. This time it was gray feathers that obscured the blood and grotesque limbs. Oh no. "I'll deal with it tomorrow, babe." Sarah's words were comforting, especially since she knew my problem with blood and death. "Come back to bed." I did as she flicked the light back off. She laid her head on my chest so she could feel the hammering of my heart as it retreated to a normal rhythm. I was nowhere near sleep, but teetering on contentment when I looked back at her bedside table. The picture was gone from its usual spot. I slid out from underneath Sarah and looked at the floor beside her. It was lying there, the glass of the frame shattered, only over the face of my wife. The next morning, I left early for work, attempting to rationalize what I saw. Every time I watch a horror movie, I laugh at the stupidity of the main character, wondering how they are able to pretend like everything is okay. They go back into the house, they enter the basement. But the brain is great at tricking itself, and it's easier to doubt yourself than try to expand the world you live in. I had transferred to another delivery branch when I and Sarah had moved. I went all over the state, managing to avoid ever getting too close to home. The nearest I got was a town about 45 minutes away. It was small and mostly farmland, known as a drive-through town. I had a podcast playing, using their words to drown out my internal monologue. I turned the corner around a familiar bend, letting myself drift into road blindness. My eyes were on the road, but my lack of sleep from the night before gave me enough of a blind spot that I almost missed it. A fucking cow was standing directly in front of me. A large spotted cow was all the detail I saw before my instincts caused me to swerve to the other side of the road. As soon as I avoided the bovine obstacle, I was staring down the headlights of an 18-wheeler about 10 feet in front of me. The truck's horn sounded so loud it shook me to my core. I swerved into the side of the road, barely keeping my vehicle upright as my tires switched from asphalt to dirt. The truck continued to sound its horn, but left me in a cloud of dust and sweat. I sat there for a minute that felt like an eternity before my heart started to settle. My podcast continued to blather, the laughter coming from it mocked me. I exited my vehicle, ready to tell off a farmer for their carelessness, when I noticed where I was. The fields I had been traveling through were replaced by the welcome sign to my hometown, not far from my childhood home that housed my past and her. I looked around for the cow that had tried to kill me, but there was nothing, only trees on either side, breaking about a mile ahead for the houses and businesses of home. The rest of the day passed without any event as I went back to my regular route. I am writing this at home, waiting for my wife to arrive and give me some semblance of peace. These events separated from each other might not stab at me like this, but together so close I can't shake this feeling, and my whole fucking house smells like tuna casserole. It started as a simple road trip. I had a few days off work and decided to drive across the state to visit an old friend. The plan was to take the scenic route, avoid the interstates, and enjoy the open road. I had my GPS set, snacks packed, and a playlist ready. It was supposed to be a relaxing drive, but somewhere along the way, I took a wrong turn, and that's when everything changed. I had been driving for hours when my GPS started acting up. The screen flickered, and the route kept recalculating. Frustrated, I pulled over to the side of the road to reset it. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods and the occasional farmhouse. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the road. After fiddling with the GPS for a few minutes, it finally seemed to be working again. It rerouted me down a narrow, winding road that I didn't remember seeing on the map. But I trusted the technology more than my own sense of direction, so I followed it. The road grew narrower and the trees thicker as I drove on. The sunlight faded, and a thick fog began to roll in, reducing visibility to just a few feet in front of my car. I turned on my headlights and slowed down, hoping I would find a way back to the main road soon. After what felt like an eternity, the fog lifted slightly, revealing an old, rusted sign by the side of the road. "Welcome to Ravenwood." I had never heard of the place, and a quick glance at my GPS showed no record of it. Still, the idea of a small town where I could get my bearings and maybe ask for directions was appealing. I drove into Ravenwood and immediately felt a chill run down my spine. The town looked like it had been abandoned for years. The buildings were old and decaying, windows boarded up or broken, weeds grew through the cracks in the pavement, and there wasn't a single car or person in sight. I parked my car in front of what used to be a diner and got out. The air was cold and damp, and the silence was almost deafening. I decided to check the diner first, hoping to find someone who could tell me where I was and how to get back on track. The door to the diner creaked loudly as I pushed it open. Inside, it was dark and musty. The tables and chairs were covered in a thick layer of dust, and the smell of mold hung in the air. I called out, but there was no response. The place was empty. Feeling uneasy, I decided to leave and try another building. Across the street was a small grocery store. The windows were covered in grime, but I could see faint light flickering inside. I crossed the street and tried the door. It was locked. As I stood there, contemplating my next move, I heard a sound behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. Just the empty street and the fog slowly creeping back in. My heart was racing now. Something was very wrong with this place. I walked back to my car, the feeling of being watched growing stronger with each step. I decided to leave Ravenwood and find another route. But as I reached for the car door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My car tires were slashed. Panic set in. I was stranded in an abandoned town with no way out. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Desperate, I decided to search the town for a working phone or someone who could help me. I walked through the empty streets, the sense of dread growing with each step. Every building I tried was either locked or empty. The town was a ghost town, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. As I approached the town square, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. He was staring directly at me. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. When I was about 10 feet away, the man turned and walked down an alleyway. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to follow him. He was the first sign of life I had seen, and I needed answers. The alleyway was narrow and dark, the walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti. The man was nowhere to be seen. As I walked deeper into the alley, I heard whispers all around me, faint and indistinct. I spun around, but there was no one there. My footsteps echoed in the narrow space, and the whispers grew louder. They seemed to be coming from all directions. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach the end of the alley and find the man. But instead, I found myself in front of an old, decrepit church. The door to the church was slightly ajar, and a faint light glowed from inside. I pushed the door open and stepped in. The interior was dark and cold, the pews covered in dust and cobwebs. At the far end of the church, near the altar, I saw the man kneeling in prayer. I approached him slowly, my footsteps echoing in the silent church. As I got closer, I noticed that he was whispering something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words, but they sent a shiver down my spine. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling. "Can you help me? I'm lost." The man stopped whispering and slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were empty and hollow, and his face was gaunt and pale. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with those vacant eyes. I took a step back, fear gripping me. "Please, I need help," I repeated. The man stood up slowly, his movements stiff and unnatural. He pointed towards the back of the church, where a door led to what looked like a small office. Without a word, he walked towards the door and disappeared inside. I hesitated for a moment before following him. The office was small and cluttered, with old books and papers strewn everywhere. The man was standing by a desk, looking at an old rotary phone. He picked it up and handed it to me. I took the phone, relieved to finally have a way to call for help. I dialed 911, but there was no dial tone. The line was dead. I looked at the man, but he just stared at me with those empty eyes. "Is there another phone?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. He shook his head slowly and pointed to a piece of paper on the desk. I picked it up and saw that it was a map of the town. There was a red X marked on a building near the edge of town. Scribbled next to the X were the words, "Help here." I looked back at the man, but he was gone. The office door was closed, and I was alone. My hands were shaking as I folded the map and put it in my pocket. I had no choice but to go to the marked building and hope for the best. I left the church and followed the map to the edge of town. The building marked with the red X was an old factory, its windows broken and walls covered in ivy. The front door was slightly open, and I could see a faint light inside. I entered the factory, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. The light was coming from a room at the far end of the building. I made my way through the dark, empty halls, the whispers following me every step of the way. When I reached the room, I saw a group of people standing in a circle. They were dressed in the same old-fashioned clothes as the man in the church. and they were all whispering the same indistinct words. In the center of the circle was a large, ornate mirror. One of the people, a woman with long, dark hair, looked up as I entered. She smiled, but it was a cold, empty smile that sent chills down my spine. "Welcome," she said in a voice that echoed unnaturally. "We've been waiting for you." I took a step back, but the door behind me slammed shut. The people in the circle began to chant louder, their voices rising in a haunting melody. The mirror in the center of the room started to glow, a faint blue light emanating from its surface. "Please, I just want to leave," I pleaded, my voice barely audible over the chanting. The woman stepped forward, her smile never wavering. "You can't leave," she said. "Not yet. You have to see." She grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the mirror. I tried to resist, but her grip was surprisingly strong. As I got closer, I saw my reflection in the mirror, but it was distorted and twisted. My face looked gaunt and hollow, my eyes empty and lifeless. "What is this?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. The woman leaned in close, her breath cold against my ear. "This is the truth," she whispered. "This is who you are." I tried to pull away, but the chanting grew louder, and the mirror's light intensified. I felt a cold, dark presence envelop me, and my vision started to blur. The last thing I saw before everything went black was my reflection in the mirror, smiling back at me with that same empty, hollow smile. When I woke up, I was lying on the side of the road, my car parked nearby. The sun was rising, and the fog had lifted. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. Was it all just a dream? I checked my car, and to my relief, the tires were intact. My phone had a signal, and the GPS was working fine. I quickly got in the car and drove away, not daring to look back. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The memories of Ravenwood haunted me, and I couldn't get the image of my distorted reflection out of my mind. Eventually, I reached my friend's house, but I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Who would believe me? Days passed, but the experience lingered in my thoughts. One night, I found an old box of family photos while rummaging through the attic. As I sifted through the pictures, one in particular caught my eye. It was a sepia-toned photograph of a small town that looked eerily familiar. In the background, I could see a sign that read Ravenwood. In the foreground stood a group of people dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces hauntingly vacant. My heart nearly stopped when I recognized one of the faces. It was the woman from the factory, her cold, empty smile unmistakable. Standing next to her, with the same hollow eyes, was a younger version of the man from the church. And there, in the middle of the group, was a boy with a familiar face. It was me. I dropped the photo, my hands trembling. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Ravenwood wasn't just a random, sinister town. It was part of my past, a forgotten piece of my history, and somehow, it had called me back. To this day, I still don't know what Ravenwood truly is, or why it isn't on any map. But one thing is certain, it's part of me, and I'll never escape its haunting presence. As I look into the mirror now, I sometimes catch a glimpse of that empty, hollow smile, and I wonder if, one day, I'll find myself back in Ravenwood, where I truly belong. Oakland Heights, Oregon, a defunct suburb of Portland, was known for its lavish charm and wealthy vibe. But beneath the surface, the area hides a secret that makes even the most skeptic shiver. A place that was so mysterious, it was forgotten by time, and was only a whisper or a rumor, called the Starlight West Theater. A notorious nightclub known for its peculiar shows, and even more peculiar owner, George Stanley. To him, the theater was like a siren's call to those who sought the unusual. A place where reality and myth blurred together into a haunting melody that was both enchanting and disturbing. Today, the alleyway on a certain street, the nightclub's facade was nondescript, hidden behind a bookstore. The only hint of its existence was a small, tarnished brass star that gleamed in the moonlight. The door was unassuming, but it led to a world that was anything but ordinary, as the foyer was dimly lit, with velvet drapes that swallowed the light and filled the air with a faint scent of roses and decay, creating an atmosphere that was both seductive and eerie. The main stage, adorned with intricate Art Deco designs, was where the heart of the Starlight West beat, pumping out a dark and mesmerizing rhythm that drew in its audience night after night. The performers, with their glinting eyes and unearthly grace, danced and sang as if under a spell, their movements eerily synchronized to the haunting melodies that played. In the 1960s, the star of the show, Evelyn Klein, was an ethereal beauty whose very presence on stage seemed to cast a shadow of sadness and fear over the room. Her voice tried to hide, captivating all who heard it, leaving them with a disturbing sense of unease that lingered long after the audience left and the theater went silent. But it was in the early 1970s that the Starlight West and its dark secrets began to unfurl, when Evelyn's performances grew less than predictable. On October 9, 1973, Evelyn Klein was reported missing, and the local papers had a field day, printing salacious headlines that spoke of love triangles, secret affairs, and the use of narcotics. Starlight West Theater became the epicenter of a media frenzy that painted the theater in a sinister light. Despite the increased publicity, George Stanley remained tight-lipped, the creases around his eyes deepening as the days turned into weeks without any sign of his star performer. Over the next few days, other performers started doing their skits and comedy shows that were lackluster and only entertaining to those who had seen them 100 times. As the atmosphere at the Starlight West was thick with tension, and whispers of Evelyn's disappearance filled the air like a heavy fog, and the formerly vibrant and energetic space now felt eerie and lifeless. The vibrant colors of the velvet curtains seemed to have faded into a sad, mourning shade, and the rhythm of the city had changed, and so had the theater, the heart of which had gone missing. However, the local mafia families, such as the Castellanos, had their eyes on the Starlight West for reasons beyond the macabre. The theater was a goldmine for laundering money and smuggling contraband. With Evelyn's disappearance, George and his usual sharp instincts had grown dull with grief, making the theater vulnerable to their advances and the ruthless for this criminal enterprise enforcer named Richie DeLuca was known for his charm, and cunning had taken an interest in the place and its enigmatic owner. Oakland Heights, that was about 30 miles away from the hustle and bustle of Portland, had its quiet charm. With its tree-lined streets and quaint little shops that had a life of their own. But tonight was different. There was an unsettling stillness that hung in the air like a shroud. The Starlight West Theater stood like a silent sentinel. The heart of the former suburb is abandoned today, the whispers of its past long silenced by the march of time. Then on June 18, 1995, some local boys who graduated from high school decided to take a road trip toward the now dilapidated remains of the proud neighborhood, now laid in disrepair as buildings crumbled and were graffitied. They had heard the stories about the Starlight West Theater and the legend of Evelyn Klein. They were curious and decided to explore the abandoned theater. The place was overgrown with ivy, and the windows were shattered, but the brass star still hung above the door, a sad reminder of its former glory. The boys, armed with pocket knives, crowbars, and a camcorder, embarked on a journey into Oakland Heights. Confronted with the sight of urban decay and forgotten dreams, with broken glass nearly covering the streets, and hollowed buildings stripped of their former charm, they pushed through the ivy and made their way into the Starlight West Theater, and the velvet drapes hung in tatters, the carpeting now threadbare and stained with the detritus of years of neglect. The air was thick with dust, and the faint, lingering scent of decay and death filled their nostrils with fear as they ventured into the sinister building as they recorded their accounts. Then suddenly one of the boys pointed at the corner of the stage, where a spotlight pierced the gloom, revealing a dusty grand piano. Its ivory keys yellowed with age, and the instrument seemed to hum with an eerie resonance, as if it remembered the days when it was the center of the theater's mystical allure. The boys approached cautiously, their footsteps echoing through the cavernous space, and one of them sat down and tentatively played a few notes, casting an eerie and haunting sound, along with a moaning of pain as well as suffering. Around 5:30 p.m., one of them shouted as they found a staircase hidden behind the curtains, leading down to a basement. Their flashlights flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The stench grew stronger, the air thick with the scent of decay. When the boys descended, their demeanor started to turn fearful as the stairs creaked under their weight, the sound echoing through the theater like a mournful cry. Later, the footage picked up a pair of glowing red eyes peeking through the shadows, and the sound of shuffling feet, the kind that seemed to belong to something that didn't quite walk like a human, grew louder as they ventured deeper into the basement, as the boys and their laughter from being too scared had turned into hushed whispers and nervous glances over their shoulders, their bravado of earlier replaced by a creeping sense of dread. The red eyes, unbeknownst to them at the time, started following their every move. The source of the eyes remained hidden, but the feeling of being watched grew palpable as they navigated through the cluttered basement, filled with forgotten props and costumes from decades past. The air grew colder, a chill that seemed to penetrate their very bones. And the basement was a labyrinth of memories and secrets, each step taking them further from the safety of the world above. Then suddenly, one of them picked up a sound of growling that made them freeze in their tracks, their flashlights shaking as they pointed them into the darkness ahead, the beams illuminating a set of yellowed fangs snarling from the shadows of a discarded prop. Their hearts racing, they realized it was a costume, a lifelike werewolf mask that once terrified audiences, but now was a mere relic of a forgotten horror. They laughed nervously and continued their exploration. The basement walls were lined with dusty, forgotten photographs of past performances. The faces of the performers frozen in time, their expressions a mix of joy and terror that seemed to follow the boys as they moved deeper into the bowels of the theater. Their whispers bouncing off the cold concrete walls and the glow from their flashlights dancing across the cracked and peeling wallpaper as the camcorder picked up an orb that was hovering with malevolence that was found later on the tape. In the corner of the basement, a single light bulb flickered ominously, casting an erratic pattern of shadows on the floor, revealing a heavy metal door that stood out against the decay. It was not old, and it had a padlock that looked untouched. The hairs on the back of their necks stood up as they approached it. Their curiosity now overwhelming their fear, changed nervous glances, the camcorder zooming in to capture the moment. The air was thick with anticipation and dread. However, knowing that there was power still on, they decided to charge their camcorder and phones, hoping that the outlet worked and wouldn't short circuit. They found an extension cord hanging from the ceiling and plugged it in. The light bulb above them buzzed louder for a moment before steadying, and the camcorder's screen flickered to life, the battery icon showing a full charge. The sudden burst of brightness from the camcorder screen was a stark contrast to darkness that surrounded them, and it was in this light that they noticed after reviewing the footage later. But for now, the boys were too caught up in their quest to pay much attention to the subtle cues of impending danger with the newfound courage. They approached the metal door, the padlock giving way with a satisfying click under the pressure of the crowbar. Suddenly, the camcorder picked up a whisper, faint and distant, a sound that seemed to resonate from the very walls of the theater, and their laughter died in their throats as they turned to face the open door, their flashlights sweeping the dusty floor, searching for the source of the sound. But the basement remained eerily silent, the only noise the steady drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere in the darkness. When the camcorder was finally charged, they continued their harrowing journey into the unknown, the whispers of the past seemingly muffled by the thick dust that coated the air. As they pushed open the metal door, it creaked on its hinges like the opening of a crypt that had been sealed off from the outside world for decades. The room was small, but what it lacked in size, it made up for in its macabre decor, with walls lined with shelves filled with jars of murky liquid and unidentifiable objects floating within, a sight that sent shivers down their spines. The centerpiece of the room was a terrifying and hideous chair with leather straps that looked as though they had been used to restrain someone or something. The chair was stained with what looked like dried blood, and the very air in the room felt charged with a sense of horror and despair, the kind that lingers long after the screams have stopped. The boys took a step back, their flashlights flickering as the reality of what they had stumbled upon began to sink in, and knew this was used by the mafia for something terrible such as torture and eventually murder, sending shivers down their spines, shaking the camcorder. Then suddenly a huge scream came from the corner of the room, making the boys jump and scream in horror, their flashlights swiveling wildly to find the source of the disturbance. A pale figure of a woman slowly stepped forward, dressed in a faded dress, dripping with blood and viscera, limping her way towards the young men, pointing her finger, and they knew it was Evelyn Klein, who disappeared all those years ago, the star of the show, now a twisted form. She let out a guttural moan, her eyes glowing with rage as she approached them, her movements jerky and unnatural, making the boys stumble backward, tripping over debris and slipping on the slick floor. Their eyes glued to the terrifying specter that was once a beautiful woman, and the camcorder fell from the hand of the one filming, its light rolling away and casting wild, erratic shadows across the room as it hit the ground, until one of them picked it back up and started recording. Then her raspy and choking voice said what sounded like, "Tell my story." as she glided through the air straight at them. The boys realized that the figure of Evelyn Klein was no mere illusion, but a vengeful spirit trapped in the theater by a terrible fate. The years of anger and pain had twisted her into something monstrous and vengeful, and one of the young men shouted, "How? Nobody will believe us." Evelyn replied, "In the cabinet," before disappearing into the darkness, leaving the room feeling colder than before. The boys frantically searched the cabinet and found a hidden compartment with papers later revealed to be a contract that bound Evelyn to the club, and the only way into fine print was either by forfeiture of her assets, accidental death by illness, or tragedy sending chills down their spines. They knew they had stumbled upon something significant, something that could unravel the mystery of the Starlight West Theater and its tragic past. Then there was a map with a circle on a lake that was located near Portland, Oregon, nicknamed Concrete Lake by the locals, after the people who were murdered by the mafia and dumped into it in the 1950s until the 1970s, when the murders stopped. The map had notes scribbled in the margins that spoke of rituals and sacrifices, hinting at a darker purpose behind Evelyn's disappearance than anyone could have ever imagined. The boys felt a heavy weight on their chests, the gravity of their discovery sinking in. After their ordeal, they took everything to the Portland Police Department, and an investigation was opened about several missing people were found now. Skeletons at this point, all of which had connections to the Starlight West Theater and the Castellanos Mafia. George Stanley was found living in a rundown apartment, a mere shadow of his former self, haunted by the ghosts of his past and the dark secrets he had been forced to keep. However, the most horrific discovery happened in an old fishing shack as the mummified remains of a woman, dressed in a tattered, stained dress that matched the one seen in the theater, were pulled out from the murky waters of Concrete Lake as the boys watched from a safe distance as the news vans descended upon the area, the flashing lights casting an eerie glow across the water's surface. And their hearts sank as the reality of their adventure turned into a grim revelation of past atrocities. Later it was revealed the mummified body belonged to Evelyn Klein. She was tortured, starved, and beaten to death because of wanting to get away from George Stanley. It took dental records to determine it was her body, and her spirit now at peace with the truth coming to light. The Starlight West Theater turned into a memorial for the victims of the Mafia's influence over the area dwindled, and they arrested George Stanley, who was in his late 70s at the time, and was charged with aiding and abetting in the murder of Evelyn Klein. He confessed to knowing about the dark dealings, but claimed he was under threat from the Castellanos family. Today, the former Oakland Heights was bulldozed, and the Starlight West Theater was renovated under a new name that was not disclosed to the public. The new owners claimed they were going to turn it into a museum dedicated to the history of the area, but the locals knew better. They knew that you couldn't erase the stain of darkness that clung to that place. The whispers of the past would always linger,